Hello and welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Our guest is Andrew Das, New York Times Assistant Editor for International Sports. He's leading the New York Times' coverage of the World Cup in Doha. My name is Neil Parekh. I'm the executive producer of the show and occasional guest host. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Digimentors website. Please like, please comment, please share, tag a friend. Let us know where you're watching from. We're going to be focusing on the World Cup today, so we're hoping we'll get more folks from an international audience. We're really looking forward to the show. In addition to talking about the World Cup, which will be the focus of our time with Andrew, we will, of course, cover the Sunday print edition of the New York Times. Particularly, the New York Times Magazine has its package 10 Best Actors of 2022. But before we get too farther into the show, let's go ahead and show you a preview of what's to come. This week, our guest on Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along is Andrew Das, New York Times Assistant Editor for International Sports. Neil Parekh is the guest host. Andrew is coordinating the New York Times' coverage of their World Cup in Qatar. There are many ways to pronounce the name of the host country. We'll try several. Andrew will give us a behind-the-scenes look at how the New York Times is covering the tournament, and will review several specific pieces. Andrew will break down the highly popular Spot the Ball feature online. He helped choose the pictures that were used. We'll also look at a story by John Branch, a former guest on the show, about $200 a night rooms in shipping containers. Migrant workers built the stadiums in Qatar. Many paid with their lives. Tariq Panja and Bhadra Sharma have a great article on Nepali migrants. Andrew Kay has an article about the challenges of doing a beer run in Qatar. Rory Smith and Tariq Panja wrote a piece about how country-specific headscarves are all the rage. Sarah Lyle has a great review of the stadiums that were built for the World Cup. We'll also take a look at New York Times Magazine's 10 Best Actors of 2022. It's beautiful online as well as in print. Sri Srinivasan is our host. I am the executive producer and occasional guest host, Neil Parekh. Paula Kiger helps produce the show, engaging with the audience on Facebook and LinkedIn. The show is produced by Digimentors. We produce high-quality virtual and hybrid events for organizations big and small around the world. We also do social and digital consulting, training, and workshops. Again, Andrew Das is our guest. Live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Digimentors website. That's a preview of what's to come. We're going to be taking a look at some of the World Cup coverage from the New York Times. We're going to learn how the sausage is made out in Qatar. As I mentioned in the preview, there are many ways to pronounce the host country. We will talk about that as well. But first, let's go ahead and welcome some of the folks who are watching. Bimal is watching from Austin, Texas. Bimal, thank you for joining us. We have Miriam Berkeley watching from Hell's Kitchen. Good morning, Miriam. And as she says, watching as usual. Miriam is one of our regular viewers. Tara is watching from North Carolina. Tara is watching on LinkedIn. Tara, thank you for joining us today. I don't recognize your name. If this is your first time, you're in for a treat. Thank you again. Our good friend Sunny Slaughter. Sunny, always great to have you watching the show. Sunny is watching from Maryland, not far from where I am in Springfield, Virginia. Sunny, of course, was a guest on our show a couple of years ago when we talked about the 1619 project. I had the pleasure of going to Sunny's house that day. Patricia Freudenberg is joining us from New York. Thank you, Patricia. Patricia is also watching on LinkedIn. Ken Fisher is watching from just below the Midwest snow in Iowa. Ken, thank you as always for joining us. Doug Levy is joining us early in California. It is 5:30 a.m. his time. I'm always impressed, but I know that Doug has a background in radio and is used to getting up early and working. But still, that's a really pretty big commitment to watch our show so early. So thank you, Doug. Diane Stefani is watching from Margate, New Jersey. Diane, always a pleasure to see you. Ted Coldman watching here in Washington, D.C., watching on YouTube. Thank you, Ted. Um, so please remember to like, comment, share. Please make sure to tag a friend and let us know where you're watching from. Our guest again is Andrew Doss, who is leading the New York Times' coverage of the World Cup in Doha, Qatar. So before we bring Andrew on, we're just going to do a quick look at what's in the paper this week, just looking at the front page sections, and then we'll go ahead and bring on Andrew. So let's go ahead and switch to the paper. As you can see, the front page focuses, the display story is when military training is not an elective. And that's public school mandates raise fears of indoctrination. We have on the lead, both sides brace for new combat in abortion war, post midterm tactics. And the other story is largest exodus imperils future of ailing Cuba. That's all above the fold. Below the fold, the large picture is from the World Cup. Morocco makes history for Arabs and Africa. The first team from Africa and the Arab world to make it to the semifinals. They beat France yesterday. Other stories on the front page: a doctor has New York's ear on mentally ill, and can sea slugs lead humans back to civil social discourse? Um, at the bottom here, better pay for food deliverers. Williams wins the Heisman. College football, feeling unsafe as vitriol rises. Intimidation and violence against gay and transgender Americans have spread. And the Starbucks CEO versus unions. So that's what the front page looks like. Sunday business. And that's one thing we can ask Andrew about, since we do have the World Cup story on the front page, whether the front page evolved yesterday based on when they put the first edition out just after noon to get it printed at various printing presses around the country up till 10, 11 o'clock last night. How many iterations did it go through? Sunday business is a big story about Howard Schultz. This is the Starbucks CEO and his fight against the unions. Howard Schultz is taking this personally. His opposition to a union isn't primarily about the bottom line, friends say. It clashes with his image of Starbucks as a model employer. A medical dream nearly realized. Scientists can now edit DNA on demand. Why aren't we using it to heal people? This is the full image of the Sunday opinion section, as you can see. And they did an interesting graphic right at the fold, so it's kind of hard to see, but hopefully you can make that out. Lego pieces on one of the steps of the ladder. Sunday styles, pottery that got personal. East Fork, a company known for its transparency, is doing some recasting. That's the Sunday Styles cover story. Arts and leisure, this is where the best of 2022 is. The music, film, this is the graphic on the top. The music, film, television, art, theater, dance, podcast, and comedy that kept us going this year. That'll be interesting to take a look at. And we have the book review, the 10 best books of 2022. If you've read any of these, let us know. Hopefully we'll get a chance to take a look later in the show. And then the New York Times Magazine. This is a beautiful piece, the 10 best actors of the year. And what's interesting with the magazine is they did 4 different covers, as you may have seen in the preview video, 4 different covers for this issue. So if we get a chance, we'll take a look at those as well. But that is what we have in the paper, what we will expect to see later. It looks like I turned some of these the wrong way. That's okay. We'll get that ready for later. But that is the quick preview of the paper. And now we'll go back again. Our guest is Andrew Doss. Andrew is the assistant editor for international sports at the New York Times, and he's leading World Cup coverage for the Times. Before we bring him on, I just want to acknowledge our production team. In addition to Sri and myself, who you see on camera, Paula Kiger is helping to produce the show on Facebook and LinkedIn. We also want to thank Muckrack, who is a longtime sponsor of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along, and remind you that the show is produced by Digimentors, a social and digital consulting firm that Sri and his friend Andrew Lee started several years ago. I'm proud to be a vice president of events and communications at Digimentors. So with that, we'll bring on our guest, Andrew Doss. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you, Neil. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. We're so thrilled that you can join us today. It is you're what, 8 hours ahead of us? So it's
8 hours ahead of New York, yes.
Yeah, out in Doha, Qatar. And we will get into how we pronounce the country where you're sitting in just a little bit. But I want to just acknowledge some of the folks who have joined us since when we started looking at the paper. Wayne Camadoy, who you know well.
I do.
And he's a great friend of the show. He was a guest a couple of weeks ago. And I want to say Wayne and Tom is actually Tom Jolly, the print editor, is the person who put us in touch. And, hopefully he didn't need too much encouragement to get you to say yes to be on the show. But
Tom
we want
actually
to thank
hired
Tom.
me at the time, so I say yes to Tom a lot.
You had to say yes, exactly. But Tom and Wayne have been huge supporters of the show, and we're going to look at some PDFs a little bit later that Wayne sent us. So thank you, Wayne, for joining us. Our friend Apollo is watching from Philadelphia. I mentioned Paula earlier; she's in Tallahassee. Chris Alsam is watching from Agawam, Massachusetts.
That's my sister.
It's
Chris.
great when family
Hi,
comes
Mom.
to support you, right?
Yeah.
Did you say hi, Mom, as well, or?
She's visiting my mother in Massachusetts. Yes.
So hopefully both of them are watching it. Maybe they have YouTube set up on their TV. They're kicking back and relaxing. Krishna Sharma is watching on LinkedIn. Krishna, thank you. And a couple other people are chatting with each other. One of the things to notice that we have a number of people who are regular viewers. It's really a family that watches. I'd say we have about 70% regular viewers every week, and then 30% is kind of new based on the guest, family, and friends, of course. People are interested in the topic, in this case, soccer. Soumya is watching, and is that, I think, I'm from Beirut. But Soumya, thank you very much. Soumya is an intern with Digimentors, so she helped out the last few shows and has helped on some special projects. So let's talk about covering the World Cup. The first question I want to ask you, Andrew, is tying what we've been asking people over the last 2 years is how have you been dealing with COVID? What has your experience been like, et cetera? I want to take a little twist on that. Can you tell us about how COVID is being managed in Doha, in Qatar, in terms of precautions in the media room, at the stadium? I know that China is actually not showing crowd shots because they have such restrictive policies at home. They did want to show that people are gathering without masks, et cetera.
Yeah.
What has your experience been with that?
The precautions here, surprisingly, I can say it two ways. Here now, none. We're not required to wear masks. We were not required to test to enter the country. Social distancing is non-existent at a World Cup. There's just a lot of people here in the market, in the souk. People, it's just jammed all the time. So that's quite different. So I was here in June for a pre-World Cup reporting trip. I had to get tested before I left London. I had to install this health app on my phone, which you needed to show to enter any building to prove that you had tested positive and tested negative and were allowed to be in the country and to be inside. So it's very different. I think that kind of took the governors off in those 6 months. COVID has been an issue. I know 2 reporters who had tested positive for COVID here. There is constant sickness going on. I apologize in advance. I'll probably cough a couple times during this show. I've had a lingering kind of low-level annoyance cough here, but some people have had more serious things. A couple reporters I know have been to the hospital just to kind of get checked out. Some of our people went home and got sick. So it's a grueling thing, but there is something in the air here.
There is something in the air. I think that we were going to talk about it a little bit later, but talking about people getting sick, we do want to acknowledge that a longtime journalist for covering soccer actually passed away just the other day. Grant Wall.
Yeah, Grant was
right.
a friend of mine. I wasn't at the game. I covered a different game that day, but we had some people at the game who were close to Grant, and it was not a good situation. Grant had been sick, but appeared to have a sudden kind of far more significant health crisis, and unfortunately died. And it's been kind of a shock to everybody. And we will, I guess, move through that in the weeks ahead.
Sure. He was a longtime, very respected, very well-renowned soccer journalist, and he was covering the game yesterday evening. So our thoughts are with Grant and his family, and of course all of his friends and all the people who worked with him over the years. Let's get back to this question of where you are. And how you pronounce that country, Andrew. How do you pronounce this country?
So the correct pronunciation through exhaustive research by many people is Qatar. But the first syllable is kind of not a sound that exists in English. It's an Arabic sound. So most of the time I will say Qatar when I'm here. And a lot of people still get it wrong. People here, people at the New York Times in news meetings, I still chuckle. When we were preparing it, I asked Sarah Lyle to do this story before the tournament. And then I asked some of our other writers to kind of do some reporting to contribute. And Sarah did a wonderful job of kind of laying out how nobody knows how to say it. And we're probably all saying it wrong. And it's really hard to say anyway. And it was quite a hit. But now I chuckle, before this published and since, to hear important people at the New York Times who will remain nameless, who still get it wrong. They just can't break the habit.
I like how they added the pronunciation guide for Sarah's name at the top of this article, in case anyone was wondering. I thought this was a great piece. I mean, this is a great example of journalism, of Times journalism online, with this little GIF at the top showing the different ways phonetically that you would pronounce it, but also the additional audio files. This is a 4-minute interview that Sarah did, but these other ones are shorter and a little bit more accessible. I'm going to hit play. This is a lecturer in Arabic studies at Columbia University. Confirm for me when we play it that you can hear the audio.
Qatar. Qatar. Qa. 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 Tar. قطر قطر.
You could hear that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, good. So that's Qatar with a rolling R at the end. The head of the World Cup organization for Qatar had a different take.
Okay. The complications are this. So most people in Qatar would say Qatar, Qatar,
Qatar.
and most Arabs would say Qatar. So the proper way of pronouncing it is Qatar. The colloquial of pronouncing it is Qatar. Okay.
I mean, that's just a great example of. This is the problem with Arabic is that each country has a different version of Arabic. It's the local Ameya. I lived in Egypt for 2 years. A lot of people know Egyptian Ameya because that's what the local the soap operas and TV entertainment come through. But Arabic is very different from Morocco all the way to the Gulf. So when you have locals, right?
Yeah, it's a common language, but not really in the way that English is not the same, even in the United States. And to the point where, Londoners can't understand Scots sometimes, the Irish are different, and if you met somebody from Louisiana or, Alabama, it would just sound different to you. But it is, in fact, what did Twain say? We're all separated by a common language. That's kind of what it is.
Suzy is watching from Atlanta. Thank you. And there were several people that offered condolences to Grant's family and acknowledging his passing. Ellen Austin is watching from the Upper East Side. Thank you, Ellen. And Patricia made the same point that even in the U.S. it's quite different. I think the question is how different is it? Can you actually understand each other, from one part of the U.S. to the other? I would posit that it's hard to understand some folks from Boston when they really get that Boston accent going. But again, I'm from New York originally, so there may be a bias involved there. Let's take a look at the special section that you put together for the World Cup, the preview that you did. This was a special print section that came out. This is the front page. And then as we scroll down, this shows a little bit of what you did in terms of the layout. Can you tell us, when did you start planning World Cup coverage? I mean, when does that process start? I'm assuming that, you don't wake up one day and said, hey, let's all go to Doha and see what we can do.
So when do we start planning it is a very interesting question. Parekh Panja was in the room, in the hall in Zurich in 2010 when FIFA awarded the tournament to this country. So it has been the bulk of the last 12 years of his career has been preparing for this. Rory Smith has covered it as long as that. I edited the story on the copy desk at the Times the day that the U.S. lost to Qatar. So we all go way back in it. But then, in 2015, there was this massive corruption scandal that then by then they had moved the tournament to the winter. They at one point discussed co-hosting it with another country. They didn't want to give it up. They discussed expanding it to 48 teams, which they will do in 2026 when it is in North America. So we've been planning for it for a while. Specific planning for this tournament, I've been thinking about this tournament almost every day, off and on for 2 years. I picked the group that was going to come to the tournament with me.
Oh, really?
And probably February of this year, I started reaching out to people. Certain people always go. Tarek and Rory and I and Andrew Kay and people are regulars now. But I asked Sarah to come. I asked John Branch to come. And so James Wagner came because James covers baseball. And traditionally, he can't cover a World Cup in June, July, and August because he's covering baseball. So this was a window where James could come. And he speaks several languages and he was a good person to have. So you kind of bring a mix of talents and a mix of people to bring the breadth of coverage that we want to bring to the thing. It is a soccer tournament at its core, but we cover that. But the way the Times coverage is much better, in my opinion, than anyone else is we kind of take you to the place, we take you to the politics and the culture and the scene. And oh, by the way, we cover the soccer very well. So it's kind of an all-encompassing view, and that takes quite a bit of planning. Tara came in April for the World Cup draw, kind of sniffed around for some places to live. I came in June to do a piece and to lock down where we were going to live, and that's 5 months before we got here. We were all credentialed by the summer. And then Rory and Parekh and everybody else, we were having conversations about stories in July and August, and all along, frankly, for the last year or so, Rory and Parekh and I, they report directly to me, so we talk soccer all the time. But we had talked about stories for the World Cup, stories ahead of the World Cup, stories during the World Cup, and they did all that reporting so that when you have a special section, you need to arrive at the tournament with stories for the daily paper and stories for the special section and stories for the first few days of the tournament as everybody travels, and a schedule for which games you're going to cover and which you might not have to cover live. And so it is an extremely complicated process. And as my wife can tell you, I didn't sleep well for months ahead of this. It's hard to plan for it, but the result is the kind of coverage that we can all be proud of and proud to be part of. And that is where the payoff is in these 4 weeks, 29 days.
And you're doing this while covering other stories, while you're based in London usually, covering
Yes, I
international
moved to
sports.
I moved to London in the fall of 21. So it's just over a year now. Our goal there is to kind of expand our international sports coverage, and it made a lot more sense to have an editor in London, which we'd never had before. Rory and Parekh live in the UK. So dealing with them in their time zone, consuming the same kind of things that they are, has been helpful, but it's also allowed me to kind of expand our reach. And we do a little more cricket here and there. We do a little more tennis. We do a little more wandering around sports where we haven't always been present, like Formula One. There's increasing interest in Formula One auto racing. And while the Times has kind of done features of it, we're looking to, in the next year, now that the World Cup's through, to really kind of dig in and bring Times coverage to that week to week or more regularly than before.
And as a reminder for our viewers, and Paula shared this link in Facebook, you can find a PDF of that special section on our website. Again, hat tip to Wayne Camadoy for sending that to us. We have both a PDF of that special section and a link to the World Cup homepage on the New York Times if you want to check that out. Speaking of how you're covering stories and kind of the TikTok, if you will, of actually getting a story online, this piece, two favorites, two underdogs, too good, about France and Argentina. This was written by Parekh, I believe, or Rory Smith.
No, Rory wrote it. Yeah.
It says it was published at 8:15 a.m. Eastern Time. Although we went live at 8:30 with this show, you joined our studio at 8:15 a.m. so that we can do a pre-check with audio, etc. Explain how this article came about and the steps it took to get online.
Sure. So, there are some things you're going to do. So Roy and I talked about this yesterday. We covered the late game last night at Al Bayt, which was a 10 p.m. kickoff. We did it live on the site. Rory wrote the game up as it ended and then wrote through. I edited, and then we grabbed a bus back. Metro shuts down at 3, so we're standing on the side of the road looking for an Uber at about 3:15 last night. We got in, and got to bed around 4 this morning. And then Rory got up today, wrote a preview of the semifinals, and then we went out and grabbed some lunch, and I came back and quickly read it, found these photos, wrote the headline, wrote the social language for it, all the things that we do behind the scenes to prepare. It's not just reading, the 750 words he wrote. There's a lot of nuts and bolts things that you have to do when we publish a story. And so I quickly did that, found some photos, I published it, and then I jumped into this chat with you. And I told the homepage that it was up so that they knew, and probably before the end of this call, that story will be on the homepage.
So you actually chose the photos. Sorry, you chose the photos and wrote the social copy. Is that standard, or is that because of the World Cup?
No, so the way we work now is we have photo editors in some cases, but an editor's responsibility is to prepare the story for publication. That's headlines, captions, photos. If it's routine things like this is just wire photos, things like that. If we had shot a big feature or something, a photo editor would be involved to make better choices, or not better choices. My choices are
These
fine.
were good choices. These are some good pictures.
They would make their choices. And but on routine things like this, and especially now that I'm 5 hours ahead of New York and London, I generally choose the photos for all of my stories. I get them published, find somebody to read behind me if I'm curious about something, and we go. On bigger pieces, there are issues when we wrote about migrants, when we write about Qatar, when we write about corruption. There's layers of people want to see this. If the story goes on A1, the masthead is interested and they have questions. If you're dealing with some touchy topics, you might run it by standards to get a sign off, and they'll ask good questions that maybe you hadn't thought of. If there's a legal issue, we run it through legal, and all of those things can take time, but we all know how to do them. We all know who to ask if they're not working that day. And it's a layered process, but as an editor at the Times now, you need to know how to do all of the things that it takes to get a story up. You have to write good social language. You have to write that will get people to read it. You have to write good headlines. You can't make mistakes. And you have to have an eye for photos too. It's a more complex job than it used to be, but you are then entrusted and empowered to make some decisions on things, on how it's going to look, and it's important.
So it sounds like it for at least these stories, if it's not an enterprise story, et cetera, it's centralizing a lot of those functions. You're not turning to someone else to write the headline, and turning to someone else to write social copy, and turning to a third person, to choose the photos, et cetera. So that's very, very interesting, and obviously a lot of responsibility on your shoulders.
Well, there should be, but yeah, and that's not every story is not just running through. This is a simple thing. Rory's a good writer. He's clean, and I'm comfortable. Sure. But when you're 8 hours ahead, sometimes I'll leave stories routinely, I will leave stories for the desk in New York for somebody else to read something. Leave it for me in the morning. I'll give it a look and publish it. Or sure, we'll get it done the night before, schedule it to publish in my morning or their evening, or I'll just have them publish a story at night while I'm asleep. And because there's a constant appetite for readers who appreciate our coverage, you have to kind of walk them through the day with new things. You want to tell them things that they didn't know, or introduce them to things. That's why Story Cycle on the homepage, even within a topic, we'll run 6, 7, 8 soccer stories in that little homepage module every day, and they'll cycle through with supplemented by some stuff from The Athletic, and which is also here covering the tournament. And so you give people a full picture of the tournament, but also a full picture of your coverage throughout the day.
And as we're having this conversation, Wayne is working on the layout for tomorrow's paper, this specific article. So Wayne, thank you for that. And I'm sure you'll do right by Andrew and Rory.
He always does.
Wayne does good work. He does good work. Speaking of the New York Times' coverage of the World Cup, I just wanted to show folks the World Cup homepage. Live or features across the top when there's a live thing going on a game, for example. You can find it there. I watched the last 2 games. on a split screen. I had it, on my computer, watching the game and then watching the live commentary from the New York Times on the other side. So that was definitely a great experience. But if you just look at the breadth of stories that the Times has, first there's this slider here in terms of a brief guide to the World Cup. We can click through some top links. We'll definitely talk about Spot the Ball in just a moment. But these stories in the middle, some explainers, the how to pronounce Qatar is right here. The scheduling.
If
And
you just
then,
stop a sec, Neil, hang on,
please.
scroll back a sec. So that view right there is a good example of the kind of breadth of coverage we do. The top left story there on Brazil was Rory wrote a piece the day after Brazil went out about, how that had happened. Alison McCann wrote the next story about what happened to Qatar's women's team. Qatar had a women's national team when they were bidding for the tournament, and played a couple games. They made a big show. This was a big thing in the Middle East to have a women's team, but it hasn't played a game in 8 years. They got the bid, and then the women's team just kind of faded away. It didn't have any support. Nobody scheduled any games for it. And so that is a women's soccer story in the Men's World Cup. The middle story, Christina Goldbaum wrote, visiting the home of a wealthy Qatari to show what life is really like. And the layers of wealth in this country are kind of a fascinating glimpse. This guy has 2 homes and cars and pools and whatever, and he doesn't consider himself wealthy in his own country. Spot the Ball is that interactive that we do. We'll talk about it in a bit. Sarah Lyle did a review of the stadiums here. There's a bracket that shows how the tournament's going to go. The Qatar pronouncer, what is offside, is a question we get at every World Cup. So this time we literally just sat down, made some graphics. The people in graphics are fantastic, and literally showed people how offside works. And I guarantee people still don't get it, but
Sure.
We will continue to try. So the point is, it is not just here's who played yesterday, here's who's playing tomorrow. It is a glimpse of the tournament, but also the place and the personalities and how it's played, and all of it is kind of what we try to bring to the World Cup, because a lot of readers are not soccer readers full time, but everybody likes the World Cup because it's super fun.
Sure. And there's some exciting, I think for casual fans, it might drag, but some of these games have just been incredible in terms of last minute scoring, penalty kicks, underdogs. There's a lot going on for fans.
I said this in the news meeting the other day, when we got to the end of the group stage. Half of the field goes out at the end of the group stage. So 32 teams are in, 16 go out at the end of the group stage. But you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of people around the world who have their hearts broken in a matter of 4 days there. Their World Cup ends. And that's really sad in a lot of these places. In a place like Germany, and Brazil went out the other night.
Brazil.
It's a devastating thing for a country that loves its team and loves its sport. And so we struggle sometimes because soccer is not a huge sport in the United States generally. It is so important to people around the world, the kind of people that we speak to at the New York Times. And we need to kind of take it and treat it with the seriousness and the responsibility that people expect, because it is really, really important.
Sure. But and then there's so many storylines with the games. Just over the last few days, as you mentioned, Brazil losing. You have Morocco, which is just an incredible story. First Arab country, first African country to make it this far. England versus France. How could you ask for a better matchup just in terms of historical relationship? Obviously, very close allies now, but I'm sure that in a soccer match, it'll be fun to root against a longtime rival. I'll admit I was happy to see England lose for many reasons. As an American, as someone of Indian origin, sure, let the Brits lose. It's great. There's a lot going on. Our friend Ron Thomas is watching from Verona, New Jersey. Ron, thank you so much for joining us. So in addition to the homepage, I want to, in addition to those stories, rather, on the soccer page, I want to also scroll down because you have, a lot of great videos that you put on, but then this run of articles in terms of looking at Brazil, looking at Argentina. You also have several in different in India, fiercely loyal soccer fans of Brazil and Argentina. So it's not just focusing on Doha, much less the United States. You have several articles in. I'm guessing this is either Portuguese or Spanish.
No,
Right
that's
here,
Spanish.
Spanish.
We translate a lot of our coverage into Spanish. The Times has a full. We translate many articles into many languages. Sometimes specifically, if when France won, we translated the final into French last year, but it was also into Spanish because
Sure.
there is an appetite for that, and there are readers who are served by that.
A great explainer on how extra time works, uh, stoppage time. There's can you tell a country by its corner kicks? And certainly there are other stories that we'll get to, that we'll talk about, particularly migrant workers. There was a huge feature on that. But what I want to do is have a little bit of fun now with the Stop the Ball feature. So we have a gift link to Spot the Ball, rather, on our website. You can grab it and play. But we're going to play online with Andrew. And Andrew, you can tell us how this feature came about. What does it take to put this together?
Oh, quite a bit. So Spot the Ball, I believe its origins were in British newspapers way, way back, a half century ago. They would print a photo and then the next day they would print the solution. And it was kind of a guessing game to get you to buy two papers instead of one. But in 2014, Sam Manchester, who's an editor at the paper, and a bunch of the folks in graphics decided to do it digitally. And so basically, you go through and you find a half dozen photos or so, and you just remove the ball from the shot. And that's literally what it is. And you allow people to guess, where do you think this ball is? And the fun part is, it is often not. That's why we choose the photos. It's not where you think it is. The photo makes perfect sense when the ball's back in it. But when you take the ball out, you really have to think about where it is. And it's a simple concept, but people really seem to enjoy it.
So let's say, if you might think that the ball is going toward the goal. Okay, it was actually just outside, and this is showing other people's guesses.
Right,
Not
but the
sure
ball is behind the goalkeeper there. So
behind the goalkeeper. I'm not sure why someone would think the ball was out here. That's a
because
possibility.
well, that's because we have over the years fooled people enough that some people will just guess random things. But Sam's really good, and what he does is he opens a photo in Photoshop, and
Yeah,
very carefully with the tools just removes the ball. But he's
sure.
really good at it,
So
and so you can't tell. So now you guess, where is this ball going to be?
here's a Brazilian player. Let's say that he just kicked the ball. No. Okay, so the ball is up there. That's playing some tricks on folks, right?
In the sense that it's not where you would expect it to be, but
No.
that's where the ball was in the photo.
Yeah.
We didn't make it up. And so
Sure.
people are on to kind of the tricks. We don't remove it generally off a player's body because the Photoshop would be really wonky. But we do sometimes, as in this one, make it hard to find.
Sure. I'll have to say I have played this twice now. The first time I was way off. I think I ended up in the 6th percentile range. But the second time, memory clued in. I'm making a point not to use what I remembered of the of where the ball was. But this is great because you have people looking in this direction, and you have the goalie looking here. So I'd spot the ball somewhere down here. but in fact, it was further out. And this is great. I think memory serves up here. No, even higher. I would encourage folks to use the gift link and play along, see how you do. If you look for the ball there, it's actually further up right by the players' heads. And then you can see results, more accurate than 21% of readers. And then you can share that feature as well. I have to admit, looking at some of the photography from the game, I'm actually thinking about, okay, if this is the picture and there's the ball, that'd be a great spot the ball picture. Just pull out the ball and, what would do that. Wayne is endorsing Sam is a magician in Photoshop. So it always helps to have someone with some good skills. And our friend Sujana Chandrasekhar says it's a fun game. Spot the Ball is a fun game. The closest we'll get to playing in the Copa Mundial, using the international term for the World Cup. Let's move on. There are a couple of stories that we wanted to feature that we talked about. Let's see here. I'm going to bring that up in just a moment. The $200 a night rooms that John Branch wrote about in containers. Now, this was fascinating because this is Fan Village, and there are several different versions. I guess you can scale up or down in terms of if you want an average container room or a deluxe container room. I think there was one for $400 a night. There were some that were like glamping and tents. Have you been out to Fan Village yourself?
No,
Andrew?
I have not. I got pulled in. I don't often have a half a day or whatever to go report anymore. So
Sure.
we asked John to go early, and he took Aaron with him, Aaron Schaff, one of our photographers. And they did. The housing was always going to be an issue in Qatar. Qatar is a country of about 3 million people. They were expecting 1 million visitors for the World Cup. Well, so when you think about it, I mean, it's just, where are all these people going to go? And so that they put up a bunch of temporary housing. They built a bunch of hotels, some of the permanent housing, but it absolutely runs the gamut, as you say. There are tents outside the city where it's kind of carpet on the floor, but if you pull it up, it's just dirt underneath. It's bare bones, but it's cheap. And then there's these containers where there's just rows and rows and rows and rows of these in these big fields, and they did their best to kind of put it together. But in the end, you're in a little camper, and some of them have been up for months. And so people would go inside and they were just covered in the kind of dust you get when you live in this environment here. Some were clean, some had not been clean from the people who were there before. This woman in this photo from Brazil, she came with her boyfriend, and they came, checked in, went to the room, opened the door, and somebody was in it already. So they had double booked. So there were all these hassles at the beginning as they sorted this out, to the point where there were 3 and 4 hour waits just to check into your little container house. But they worked through it, I guess. But they brought in cruise ships as extra housing. There are 5-star, 7-star hotels. If you have the money and the connections, you can stay as comfortably as you would like. It is a very expensive country to live in. So $200 a night for a container, that's
7 stars. That's not where I usually stay.
No.
In that bracket. It's certainly, and I want to get back. You mentioned it's a country of 3 million, and they are expecting 1 million visitors.
Right.
Did they expect to have hit that number? Is that
it's hard. We don't know.
Sure.
Our sense is fewer people have come than would traditionally come to a World Cup. People objected to coming over cost, on moral grounds. They just didn't want to be part of this. They didn't like the idea that, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of these poor people had done all this work to build housing for a month-long tournament, and they just didn't want to be part of it. Some had problems with Qatar, some had problems with the process that gave it to them, which was a corrupted bidding process. It
Sure.
was later proved. Some people didn't want to come in the winter. I will get home a few days before Christmas. It's a little late. I miss Thanksgiving, So the timing was a little strange. It has been well attended by some countries. Mexico, Argentina always show up. It doesn't matter. They could play the World Cup on the moon and 50,000 Argentines would show up. It doesn't matter. So whatever it cost, they would come. But you don't see. But if you go, so the U.S. played the Netherlands last week, and it really felt like there were single-digit thousands of Dutch fans. They just didn't come. You saw maybe more of a presence for Americans. There was a healthy England contingent last night. France was a little smaller. I think a lot of people just kind of sat this one out. Maybe because the next one's in North America, and they said, well, we'll just go then. It'll be more fun. It'll be easier. Some people stayed away because there was no alcohol here. Some people stayed away because of some of the laws here. They were just a little unclear of what they were going to expect, what was going to be allowed. Maybe they didn't think it'd be any fun. That has been overcome, I think. I think the alcohol thing it's overblown. The Arab world is not an alcohol-fueled place generally, and they live their lives just fine without alcohol every day. So to the Arab fans you meet, they don't care that there's no alcohol because they weren't going to drink it anyway.
Well, there was
they're loud and colorful, and they're enjoying it. So
that was a last-minute decision from
correct
the host country in terms of not, but they do have a government store selling alcohol for folks. Andrew K did a story about a beer run.
Yeah, to be clear, you can buy alcohol in Qatar. Some of the fan zones here sell beer. In the big hotels, you can sell. It's expensive, and there's a premium on it. But there is also a retail location that the government sanctions and allows. It's not government owned because they don't want any part of it. But when we got here through FIFA, they offered journalists the right to get a permit to go to this so they could have their own alcohol in your own home as if you lived in the country. And so Andrew signed up and he went through it. He kind of surreptitiously took these photos that are in this story because he didn't know, am I going to get in trouble? But we didn't think we couldn't send a photographer with a bag into the liquor store. We just didn't know how that would go. And also Andrew had gone already. But it's a proper liquor store. Sam and I went last weekend because Andrew only went by himself and he didn't bring enough. And we got 12 people here and we like a beer at the end of the day. So we went back last weekend and that's what it looks like. Just cases of beer stacked up, shelves, literally anything you want to drink. It's not a big deal. The strangest part of this story was there is also a little room in the liquor store that is for pork. You can buy bacon and pork chops and whatever because those are not available here. They don't stock them in the grocery stores. They don't serve it in restaurants, So you can get pork it is this kind of little forbidden garden in the outskirts of Doha.
I will say when I lived in Egypt, I lived in Cairo from 2003, 2005. So quite a few years ago, almost 20 years ago, but you could actually get alcohol delivered to your home, late into the night. My wife and I don't drink, but friends of ours did. So even in a Muslim country, there are ways to get alcohol, certainly.
So we had kind of thought about this as kind of a quirky story about how you would find, but when you do it, you realize that this is just another place that is off limits to the majority of the people who live here, which are people who are not Qatari citizens. They don't have a lot of rights. And so one of the things that Andrew wrote about was kind of how it's two different worlds. And there is an income limit to get a permit to go to the alcohol store. And it is about 3 times the minimum wage here, which effectively prices out anybody who wants to have a drink in the majority of the population. Even if they wanted to pay for it, they're not allowed in.
Yeah. Yeah. Here it's the individual permit holder. Well, they get I forget where I know the detail was in the story. I do want to make sure we cover a few other stories. Migrant
Sure.
workers. This is such an important story when talking about the World Cup, when talking about Qatar. Um, Hundreds of thousands of people came in to work on the stadiums, on the venues, etc. And the number of deaths of migrant workers was incredible. This story focuses on Nepali workers, Nepali migrants. Not the largest contingent, from what I understand, but maybe the highest percentage of deaths. And what struck me about this article and the detail, and I was very familiar with the issue of worker safety and the deaths of migrants in building the venues. This gives the number of people who are where they were working, but the cause of death is what struck me. And this is, I'm going to make this a little bigger for folks um, on the screen. Um, Cardiac arrest or heart attack 700, natural death 330, road accidents, suicide, workplace accidents were only 183. My assumption, I hadn't dug into it before, I assumed it was just uh, you know a worker safety issue, and all these deaths were happening building the actual venues. But it was more than that. It was a lot of uh, larger health issues.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, cardiac arrest and heart attack is kind of a shorthand for what they've come up with for basically this guy died. But what it is people working 10 and 12-hour days in extreme heat, 6 days a week for months and years, not surprisingly, have heart attacks and cardiac arrest at far higher rates.
Yeah.
And so basically it, and you have to remember that there are only 8 World Cup stadiums, but Qatar has rebuilt itself as a nation to prepare for this. You're talking about roads and an entire subway system and hotels and apartment buildings and everything that goes into that. And oh, by the way, they also built some stadiums. So the organizing committee's always tried to limit the number of deaths and says there's only a single digit number of men have died at stadium, but that undercounts massively the number of people who have died in this country in all the ways in that chart. And it leaves out altogether people who have lifetime health problems. In Tarekh's story about Nepal, when he went, a doctor told him that you just see hundreds and thousands of people come back with these terrible kidney problems that are very clearly the result of working in extreme heat for years and years and years in the Gulf. But nobody's studying it on this side in Qatar, and nobody's studying it in Nepal, really. So there's not really any investigation into the how and why and the non-death consequences, which are far more severe and far more life-altering for the people who survive working here.
Sonny Slaughter is saying the exploitation of workers continues to be a painful reality that is often ignored, dismissed, and downplayed globally. One is too many. One is one too many. This graph I really got my attention. Workers succumb to an array of ailments, premature heart attacks, unexplained heart-related health problems that one local official described as environmental disadaptation.
Yeah, heat related, not heart related, but yeah.
Heat related. Well, coming from Nepal and working in Qatar, no one is committed to studying it, but will eventually kill thousands more, which is just incredible. So it's such an important story, and as an example of the commitment and commitment to telling these stories, but also kind of how broad a field you go. You had Parekh go to Nepal and report on this with a colleague, Badra Sharma. to actually go write this story. I thought that was very well done, and showed a really commitment to. And this is, I mean, if you look back, there are a number of stories about migrant workers over the last few years.
If I could just, one
Please.
more thing on this story. One, we
Please.
wanted to, Tarek and I talked about this story a long time before we identified a place to go and whatever, because a lot of the Western coverage of migrant labor related to Qatar has been a lot of, it has missed the larger picture. It is that all of these workers willingly come to do this work because the options where they live in some of the poorest places on earth are so bad that they need this money. You know, the money that they come here to earn builds homes for their families back in Nepal and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and India. It pays their kids' school fees. So, and they borrow money to pay recruiters to get them jobs in the Gulf to go do this. And they'll stay here for 5 years and 10 years and 20 years to do this and send home money and call their families, you know, every day or every couple of days. And that's how you have this entire generation of children growing up with their fathers because they went to the Gulf to try and improve their family's lot in life. And that is not necessarily just a Gulf thing. You know, people try to get into the United States all the time because the alternative is worse. It is better to try and see if you can do it. People get into boats in Africa and try and get into Europe because the alternative for them is better. You know, it's a nuanced issue of migrant labor, and it's not just an issue around a single World Cup, and it won't go away. All these faces in this photograph are all, Qatar put this up at Lusail Stadium, which will host the final, as a mural. And I took a photo just like this in June when I came because they had showed us this. And if you look into the faces of these men, they're just work ID photos, but nobody's smiling. It's not happy. They came to do a job because they needed the money. And Parekh, when we got here, went to the stadium because he had not come with me in June. And he went to this spot and they painted over it for the World Cup because they didn't want anybody to see it. Mm-hmm. Because they realized it wasn't the tribute that they thought it was. You know, somebody asked one of the World Cup people, oh, are those all the people who died building this stadium? And they just, it's just the human cost to this is so beyond what we can think about as Westerners who live in a place and were born into places that were perhaps more fortunate than some of these people. And you can't forget that, you can't forget as you sit in a building here or sit in a stadium here, what happened, what it cost to build it. But you also have to remember that some people's lives were improved. They willingly did this because their lives are improved by finding this work. And when this is done, they will move on and they'll go to Malaysia and build office buildings, or they'll go to Saudi Arabia and build stadiums for them because Saudi Arabia wants the World Cup. They'll go to the UAE, they'll go other places because there's always places that need labor. And there's always a better wage to be paid there. Even if it's a low wage, it's better than what you can get in rural Nepal.
Sunny also shared that Nepali men were used to rebuild Louisiana after Katrina, and 200 men were the victims of significant labor trafficking. Here in the U.S., it happens in the U.S. as well.
Yes, they pick apples in England. The Guardian had a story right before I left here about a bunch of Nepalis who were given permits to come pick fruit in Britain, and then they sent them home because they didn't need them anymore. But these guys had borrowed all this money to get these jobs, and now they didn't want to go back because they hadn't made the money back, and they were going to lose money on the trip. So.
Miriam is sharing about a BBC radio play recently about that. And my mom is watching, actually. Hi, Mom. My mom is a regular viewer, Andrew. It's not special just because of you, just so you know. But she's saying many migrant workers don't get the food that they need. She's actually watching from Hastings-on-Hudson, New York, my hometown where I grew up. She's still in the same house. She just came back from India this week. So welcome back, Mom. Glad you could join the show again. I wanted to, you were talking about these pictures on the wall. This is one of the PDFs that Wayne had sent me. This is the follow-up to that story on migrant workers. Thousands of faces all suddenly gone. This was on November 28th, in the November 28th paper. A monument to migrants who built Qatar stadiums has been replaced by logos and slogans. And if you scroll down, this is that same wall as you were talking about.
Right. So after Parekh realized they had covered it all up, we sent Badel Sajay, one of our graphics guys who was shooting a game there, and we had him go early and shoot. We gave him the photos that Tasneem had taken in the summer and had him recreate the shot, basically, so you could see the difference. So.
Yeah, incredible. As a reminder, folks, our guest is Andrew Das. He is coordinating the New York Times' coverage of the World Cup in Doha, Qatar. And we want to at least acknowledge some of the other stories that were in the paper that got our attention. We also hope to show some more PDFs if we can. This is a special edition focused on the World Cup. Andrew, thanks again for joining us late afternoon your time. There was a great story about headscarves that were a World Cup accessory in the colors of every team, every national team, and some great photography here just to tell the story. If you scroll down, that you see they're being sold. This is an American version, and the big thing is that this is not considered offensive. Qataris are actually okay with this.
Yeah, we went into it. Rory was kind of curious, and he and Parekh decided to go and kind of report it out and see, was this kind of cultural appropriation, for lack of a better term, or was it offensive? We don't know enough about this, and I think fans coming probably didn't know enough about it too. But this guy, for example, had looked into it a little bit and wanted to make sure for himself that it wasn't, a religious thing that was somehow offensive if he did it. But I think a lot of people didn't think about it. There was a store in the around the corner from our apartment where you can buy one in every color of every team, except for Qatar. Nobody wanted. They didn't make one. They don't sell one because who's going to wear one?
Exactly.
So,
he says, his quote in the caption, "I was doing my best to research before buying it. I didn't want to be disrespectful in any way. The reaction has been positive."
And that is actually true. The Qatar specifically, and the Gulf generally, and the Arab world has really embraced the concept of this being the first Arab World Cup, that they all feel like part of it in a way that they have not been before. And so this is kind of these things, it turns out, to some of the people we talked to, was a way to kind of leave an Arab stamp on this tournament. And it's fine, but you can find videos online. It's kind of funny of people wearing it wrong, and a man in a white long thobe will walk over and stop him and then kind of fix it for him. So it's right. And people are really appreciative. So it's there've been some funny moments that way, but yeah, most of the people we talked to thought it was a nice way to kind of blend this place with this tournament in a way that it hadn't happened before.
Naomi Service is watching. She's watching from the frosty Upper West Side. Terrific analysis. She's talking about our conversation about migrant workers. But she also said that sometimes cultural appreciation is wrongly viewed as cultural appropriation, which I think is a very good point.
That's a very good point, and it's something you have to think about. And it's not always your call of what it is. You do have to be respectful sometimes and make sure that it is not the latter.
Getting back to the story about migrants for just a moment, some interesting comments that came in. Sonny saying that the problem is complex, nuanced, and people are willing to risk it all for their families, certainly. Patricia, watching on LinkedIn, thank you for your compassion in bringing this to our attention and having respect for those who served in building this for the World Cup. Dr. Chandrasekhar, this is a nuanced discussion of migrants and why is so important. This nuanced discussion, rather. And so I think that really resonated with folks in terms of that overall discussion. Do want to mention real quickly this great piece, and all of these articles are on our website, the ones that we're focusing on. This was
And our
Sarah.
website, I'll cut in.
Oh, and of course, your website as well. There, we only have like 6 of the articles on our website, so I'm trying to make it easier. You have so much on your website, Andrew, that people would get lost. But of course, we want. I mean, this is. I mean, people know this. Our regular viewers know this. But the show, we haven't even turned to the print edition yet. I will turn to the print edition for a little bit. But this is a celebration of the New York Times of print, but of coverage, and in this case, getting this behind the scenes look at the World Cup is certainly fascinating, and we appreciate all of the insights. It's kind of like an hour and a half inside the Times column, if you will.
I'm just needling you.
I know. I
don't be
know.
offended, please.
This is the piece that Sarah did on the stadiums. So we're talking about what it took to build them. These are some of the end result in terms of, again, focusing on the photography. You can see some of the venues, the hotels. This is a hotel on the right that looks like a torch. And
The stadiums, Neil, are one thing that has been universally praised here. They're really beautiful. They're really well done. I don't know that they needed all of them, and they say they have uses for them after the fact, but they're really, really special. They're all a little different. The one on the left you're showing now, Al Tumama, is designed to look like this small woven cap that Arab men wear under their headdresses. Lusail is this gorgeous golden bowl that just at night looks great.
Absolutely.
But the one above, 974, was made out of shipping containers, and they are already taking it apart and have said they will donate it to somebody else. Al Bait, the top one in this story, is designed to look like a giant desert tent and is
that's the shipping container one.
Yeah, that was my favorite. It was the most unique place I'd ever been in to watch a game. Even the bathrooms inside were shipping containers.
This is the one
they went all in. This is Al Bait. It's kind of
tent
designed to look like a tent. Inside the ceiling of the stadium is actually a patterned red and black fabric. It's really impressive and not like any place you've ever been.
And as a reminder for folks, all of these articles and so much more, much more, is on the New York Times World Cup site. And this link is on our website as well. So we certainly encourage you to check it out. There were a number of PDFs that we got as well. We will put them on our website after the show for folks to check out. So if you want more of a look of the coverage and how it looks in print, I definitely encourage you to check out the website, our website, for PDFs and links to articles. And you'll also find a link to the New York Times World Cup website when you go there. So let's take just at least a few moments and look at the print edition of the Sunday Times. We also want to look at the 10 best actors for this week's issue. And we'll give Andrew will stay on with us, but you can take a little bit of a break. If you have something to add, certainly jump in. But this is the print edition of the paper, and we'll just take a quick look at some of the stories, at least in the front section. And as I mentioned, we will look at the magazine as well. The as a heads up for folks, we plan to go just to about 10 o'clock, so bear with us. We will do our best to stay on time. Next week, our guest is going to be Megan DeTrolio as we turn to A2, A3. This is a redesigned version of the A2 and A3 pages. It looks they changed it in mid-November, if I'm not mistaken. she will join us to walk us through the redesign. So we're really looking forward to that. Megan Detrolio will be our guest next week. So flipping through the international section, this is the article about that we saw right on the homepage in the World Cup. So it's not in the World Cup coverage per se; it's in the general international section, which is interesting. His estate has 3 pools, a gym, and a stable, but he says he is not rich. Belgian inquiry into Qatar and bribery shakes European Parliament. Again, another Qatar-based story. Is this specifically about the World Cup or bribery in general?
It's a broader bribery scandal in Europe. It's long been reported and rumored and whispered and documented that Qatar throws a lot of money around the world to kind of influence decisions. They've spent a lot of money in the U.S. They spent a lot of money in Europe, and apparently that this broke during the games last night, so I've not caught up to it. But yes, they apparently threw some money around in Europe in improper ways.
Oh wow. Keeping it going, this is an article about Cuba, which was on the front page. This is another international story. China's hospitals bracing for a tsunami of COVID cases. We are seeing COVID cases on the rise. There's also the flu and RSV. I know in some schools, they're having to close schools because too many teachers are sick. It's not even just the students, but too many teachers, and they can't continue with classes. This is a first person. My friend helped me carry my burdens. His proved too heavy. This is Dateline New Delhi. We'd want to take a look at that later. This is an article at Nobel Prize ceremony. Russian imperialism takes center stage. Fighting for peace does not mean yielding to pressure of the aggressor, said Alexandra Matvichuk of Ukraine, accepting Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo. Here in the national section, tough choice for California City Library or police station. This is in McFarland, California. Let's see, what else do we have? This is Carrie Lake, who ran for governor of Arizona, is suing over her loss in the Arizona governor's race. Election denial continues. Transgender Americans feel under attack. That's on the right-hand side. This is that article from the front page. Can the sea slug help humans to rediscover civil social discourse? That is certainly... this seems like there's a lot to this article. I'm not going to try and figure it out with a quick read through. One thing I
would very much like to know the answer to that question.
Exactly. One thing I like to point out. So I get my paper printed. The Washington Post prints my version of the New York Times. There are 27 plants around the country that prints the paper. At College Point in New York, they can print 45 pages. The A section is one book. But elsewhere, they actually get separated. And so I always find it fascinating where this break happens. And I think Wayne told me that sometimes they do try and make an intentional choice as to what article is going to be on page 25. Because that is a natural, when you're flipping through the paper, it's easy to see this article, even if you're just flipping through. So that's always interesting to take a look at. It's a different experience depending on where you're based. As we mentioned, here is the Sunday Business article, Howard Schultz and his battle with the union for Starbucks. I did want to just acknowledge at least that on Thursday, the New York Times Guild did a 24-hour work stoppage. They're in the middle of negotiations with the New York Times. It was challenging for me, but I did take the New York Times app off my homepage. I probably check it at least 20 times a day, and I'm not a Wordle person, but I did want to express my support for the New York Times Guild. As a former union I used to work with a union. My mom is a retired member of a union. So I just wanted to show my support there. And this article about Howard Schultz is also definitely interesting. There was a Sunday opinion section and Sunday styles. This arts and leisure section, best of 22, I really appreciate these review articles where they look at the 10, the best music, film, television, art, theater, etc. And this is interesting in terms of the layout here on the left-hand side, the 2022 in review, in case you missed it. I'm looking, these looks like, so what movie, TV show, album, performance, podcast, or artwork stuck with you this year? Looking back at 2022, some of our culture staff members answered with their highlights. I'd be really curious whether this color coding is intentional. Whether there's anything to the blue or the purple. I wonder if Wayne is still watching. He can let us know in the comments if there's anything to that. So I'll just keep an eye on comments coming in. Let's see, what else do we have? It's the best theater, the best of 22 in terms of culture, dance, great photography here, and best of 22 in terms of classical, television, jazz and podcast. Maybe it's podcasts on the right is my guess, and television. Let's see if there's anything I recognize. Certainly have heard. I haven't watched Reservation Dogs, but that jumps out at me. And do you watch any TV in your downtime, Andrew? Do you have any downtime?
Well, so since I moved to Britain, I'm largely a streaming person now.
Sure.
So my wife and I watch a lot of Netflix and I don't know. Can I say, like, we have YouTube TV now at our home in Connecticut?
That's what I use.
And so we have access to it abroad, just not the local channels. But she has hacks to find all kinds of stuff, and I have a BBC TV license, so we watch a little of British TV. It's kind of a mix. But no, I find myself, I watch so much live sports that I try and limit my television consumption. So I won't be much help on jazz and podcasts and American.
We use YouTube TV as well, and have probably more services than we should. Disney, Hulu, Netflix, and the likes. I'm sure Stars. We binged Wednesday, the Wednesday Addams show about the Addams family, the more modern retelling. It was my daughter that wanted us to watch it, but I'd say anyone would enjoy it. It's definitely mysterious and ooky. Film and pop. That's Beyonce right in the middle. Art and culture. Just lots of great content to look through. As we're coming to a close, I do want to show the New York Times Magazine. So this is my cover that I got. But what's interesting is, and I'll show it on the screen real quick, there were 4 different covers that the New York Times put out. So depending on your location, you would have gotten a different version of the story. The 10 Best Actors by Wesley Morris and A.O. Scott, photographs by Ryan McGinley. So we'll take a look at the print edition real quick, and I'll show the online version. Andrew, if you have a few extra minutes, we still do want to get the pro tip from you. So if you can think through what you want to share with writers, we'd appreciate it. And we'll do our best to wrap up the show. Excuse me. So they're showing the 4 different covers. This week, there are 4 different covers, 4 different great performers covers. Michelle Yeoh, Kiki Palmer, Daniel Kaluuya, and Michelle Williams, clockwise. And so then let's just take a look, because I know that there's some great photography and great layout as well when you set up the page this way in terms of the angle. I mean, that's an interesting choice to do it that way. A little white on black. You can see the margin is angled on both sides, actually in the middle as well. So just really fascinating the way they put this together and shaping the text this way. Brendan Gleeson. So this is what you wouldn't see if you don't have the print edition. This is how they handled it. I do want to show what it looks like online as well, because I'm always interested in when the New York Times does something special online. This certainly qualifies as special. So let's take a look at that real quick. And I'll take the newspaper off. So this is their website for Best Actors. The link is on our website. If you scroll to it, but if you scroll down, you have this kind of thing. Oh, is this from last year? This was 2021. Oops, I made a mistake. let me fix that real quick. 10 Best Actors, 2022. I'll have to check whether that's what I have on the website as well. Let's try that again. Let's see here.
We said we'd show them how the sausage was made, Neil.
Exactly. Sometimes, it's ugly, but sometimes you also can make a quick pivot. So this is what this year's page looks like. Check out how that text rotates when you scroll down. And then you have Michelle Yeoh. You see the text moving on the left, the different images, and then like this. I mean, I just think it's fascinating when they put this
Our
kind of
interactive design people are out of this world good at their jobs.
Yes.
Wish that you could be as good as one thing in your life as they are at doing this, because it's great every time.
Check out Frankie's name as you scroll down. I mean, it's just really fascinating, really interesting. So I wanted to at least show that. Of course, there's advertising as well. I'm glad that there's advertising, that people find that it's worthwhile to invest in the Times. That's always, I take that as a good sign. But with that, Andrew, I do want to give you that break. I'm going to make a few quick announcements and then ask you to share a pro tip with us for writers. Again, our guest has been Andrew Doss. He will be coming back in just a moment. I want to thank Paula Kiger again for all of her work in helping make this show such a success. You see Sri and myself on screen. Paula is working behind the scenes to make it work. And she's part of how we make our sausage every Sunday morning. So thank you, Paula. And again, we want to thank Muckrack, our longtime sponsor of the show. Let folks know that the show is produced by Digimentors, the social and digital consulting firm that Sri started with his friend Andrew Lee. As a final note, we want to make sure you know about the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University. They bring you the Local Connection newsletter. Each week, it offers story ideas and pro tips for journalists. Best of all, it's free. You can subscribe at bit.ly/local news tips, bit.ly/local news tips. And that's where Andrew's pro tip will appear in their weekly newsletter. As I mentioned earlier, next week, our guest will be Megan DeTrolio, senior editor at the New York Times. She joined the Print Hub in October 2021, not 2011, and to lead the A2, A3 team. And they redesigned those pages last month. So we're going to get a really great, some really great insights from her into that process and what it took to do that redesign. So again, I want to bring back Andrew Doss. Andrew, we are looking for a pro tip for journalists. What would your advice be to writers?
My advice is kind of, I have the same conversation with my reporters every time we do a story. Is one, we don't report a story, we do the reporting and then decide what the story is. But whenever they come back, I ask them, what's the best thing you found out? Because I had an editor once who would ask me that. And it helps kind of focus you on the details and the best bits of your reporting. And that, for us, is always a good clue on where the story is and where it should go. You know, the best details are paying attention to the details during the reporting will reveal the kind of things that make your story different, make it better than anybody else's. You know, Juliet McCurr did a story once for me. I'll just give you two fast examples about a football player who had fallen into homelessness and everything. And one of the great details in the top of that story was she counted the holes in his belt, which he had kept adding as he lost weight from drug use and homelessness and all his problems. And she counted the holes in his belt buckle that in his belt that he poked in just to keep his pants up, which I thought was a fascinating detail and told a lot about kind of the long decline in his physical health. But also you kind of need to watch after the Croatia game the other night. Croatia beat Brazil. There was this big celebration, players all over the field, but I watched it after I filed my quick running bet. I watched and watched and watched. And in the celebrations, all the kids came out on the field with their dads and they were celebrating. And two kids ran to the center circle where Neymar was crying with a teammate because Brazil had just lost. And these two kids in Croatian jerseys ran out, and Brazilian coach came over to kind of cut them off. Like, now's not the time, kids. But they wanted to see Neymar and they wanted to shake his hand and touch him. He was finally so close. And so Neymar, in this brutal moment in his career and in his life, kind of broke off and gave this little boy a hug. And it was such a great moment. And it said kind of a lot about the day and the joy and the pain of it all at once. And I used it in my story, and I was kind of glad that I had sat there and watched it because you miss that kind of stuff when you just put your head down and start writing.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Really appreciate it. We really appreciated the behind the scenes look at the World Cup coverage. You're going to be now before the next World Cup, you'll have other major events that you'll be covering, I assume, right?
Yeah, I also help with a Women's World Cup next summer in Australia and New Zealand. It's in the United States, at least, an enormously important event. The U.S. women's team is at this huge crossroads as the rest of the world kind of closes the gap. That'll be a very big time. The Paris Olympics is in 2024. We have a World Cup in North America in 26. There's the Winter Olympics in Milan. There's lots of things coming, and we'll be on top of all of it.
It'll be interesting to see how coverage is planned and organized for the World Cup in North America on home turf, if you will. The number of people you could throw at it, the number of resources should be fascinating to watch. Hopefully we can have you back on the show around that time.
Would love to once I figure it out, because I don't know yet.
once you figure it out, of course. Again, our guest has been Andrew Doss. He's coordinating the World Cup coverage for the New York Times. And Patricia says thank you to the production team and our guest. You've been knighted, Andrew, in case you didn't.
Big day for me.
You know, kind of a battlefield promotion, if you will, for a wonderful episode covering the World Cup and more. Jay Polacki also said great coverage. Sonny Slaughter says thank you, Andrew, and the entire team for our work. Diana said that she loved the pro tip from you. It was a great show, great guest. Thank you. And of course, my mom says great show as well. She'll also text me afterward she never tells me what I did wrong, which is really great. She always tells me how great everything was. So either she missed a few of the miscues, or she's just being my mom. We'll end with Wayne's comment. And I think we should just sit back and enjoy this. Andy is tireless and invaluable at these international events. High praise.
That's very nice of Wayne. And I rely on Wayne quite a bit on the print end of this during this and the Olympics. And we've done a lot of these together. And I wouldn't do it without him. And it makes it all more special when you do good work and then Wayne can somehow make it even better.
Absolutely. And you know, there was so much that we covered. There are some great PDFs that Wayne sent me that I will put on our website. Some great layout work, some great design work. And I think if I remember correctly in the email he sent me, sometimes, you know, I was praising the layout and he said, well, when you have great words, the layout just, you know, kind of reveals itself. And so there's mutual admiration, I think, in terms of the work that folks are doing. Again, Andrew Doss has been our guest. Great conversation about the World Cup. We look forward to seeing you next week when we talk about the redesign of A2 and A3. Next week will be our last show of 2022. Thank you and have a good Sunday.